When we feel shame, there is an implication that something is wrong. And not just something. It's like when we feel shame, we feel that who we are, is wrong. We feel like there is something wrong with me. And it's very important to understand that. It's like the nature of shame points directly back at ourselves. Welcome to the Embodied Mystic Podcast, where we explore the path of feminine awakening and luscious womanhood. Together we'll be diving into topics like sacred sexuality, feminine embodiment, spiritual healing, and soulful relationships. I'm your host, Tamar, tantric mentor and Aries hype girl, here to guide you back to the temple of your body and fall in love with being a woman. I look forward to journeying together. Hello, my honey. Welcome back to another episode of the Embodied Mystic Podcast. And if you're new here, welcome. I am so thrilled that you've chosen to tune in here. This is the place where we talk about everything divine, feminine energy, sacred sexuality, and embodied mysticism. I am absolutely loving connecting with you guys in the DMs lately. It really just warms my little heart and just makes me feel so grateful to have this opportunity to connect with you all and to share about these topics, which I feel so passionate about and love so deeply. So thank you so much for being here. I've been wanting to come and talk to you all about this subject. What is erotic innocence and how to let go of sexual shame? I have been wanting to talk with you loves about this for such a long time, and I'm so thrilled to finally share this episode with you. It is a long one, so I'm going to keep this intro really brief. But I just wanted to share that I recently had such a gorgeous conversation with Claudia for her podcast, Ecstatically Ever After. And we actually touched a little bit upon erotic innocence and overcoming shame in that episode. So in this one, I've tried to really speak about different things, to go deeper into this specific subject, but I'm so excited for that episode also to come out. It was just such a rich and juicy conversation. So when it does, I'll let you know on social media, and likely I'll probably end up sharing it also on this podcast too. So let's dive in. This topic is something that I'm so deeply passionate about, and it reminds me of this time. I'm going to tell you a little story. I was at an ecstatic dance in London many years ago, probably three years ago, something like that. And after the dance, everyone was kind of just chilling, hanging out. And after the closing circle, I was next to this woman, and for some reason we got chatting, which is actually it's cool because I'm very introverted. I mean, I'm friendly, but I'm not the life of the party, and I'm very okay with that. But somehow I got talking to this woman, and for some reason she asked me what I did, and I told her I'm a sacred sexuality coach. And this woman looked back at me, and her eyes just started welling up with tears. I was like quite taken aback, and I just kind of like let her be in her experience. I mean, I was surprised at her response, but because I hold space for people and it's a big part of my work, I just kind of like was sitting with her and just allowing her to like be. And when she finally spoke and like addressed, her emotional state, she shared with me that she'd never heard anyone use sacredness or sacred in the same sentence as sexuality. And just that realization that she had just brought up so much emotion for her and really opened a door for her where she started to realize, like, wow, this is a point that touched her. It's like she was making contact with this unknown longing, this kind of like desire that she had within herself that she wasn't even aware of, to know what it's like to experience sacredness and sexuality at the same time, how that might feel, how that might look like, was such a poignant moment for me. I felt so touched to share that moment with her, and I don't know where that woman is now. I don't remember her name, but I hope she has gone on her own journey. So I really believe in the importance of merging our eroticism and our innocence. In fact, I believe it's absolutely key for women, especially, to unlock their own connection to their sexual energy. I feel that it's key for them to fully claim their pleasure, and not only that, but to do so in a way that feels rooted in their hearts and truly sacred. We all have a unique relationship to the sacred and what sacredness really means to us. And that's what makes this journey so individual, so unique, and also so powerful and so touching. A really crucial part of this conversation around erotic innocence and exploring what that means for us as individuals is really acknowledging shame. Shame is something that shows up for us all in different ways. It might be something that you're aware of, or it might not be something that you're aware of. I, for many years, actually couldn't make contact with my own shame. I just couldn't quite feel it. It's like I felt guilt, I felt fear, but shame, it was hard for me to connect consciously with the amount of shame that I was holding around my body and around just me. Shame is something that really rots away at our core sense of self. We are robbed of our innocence when we are kind of like swirling in this cycle of shame. And yet so many of us have this shame deep, deep down, and particularly around our sexuality, particularly around our body, particularly around, who we're attracted to, what we're attracted to, when we're attracted to. There's just so much, and most of us, I think, were born into a society where there was like a standard of what's normal. And really often we use these standards to measure ourselves against. And we don't just measure ourselves against them. And, this is kind of connected to this topic of judgment. It's like, I just want to say that judgment is not inherently negative. Comparison also, it's a skill. It's a mental capability that we have, and it serves its purpose. But when comparison becomes a problem is when we take that measuring stick and we just beat ourselves with it. That's how most people are using comparison as something to shame themselves further over. I know this might feel like quite dense or quite challenging, or like I imagine quite confronting as well, but it's so important to cover shame and the impact that shame has on us and why we might feel it. It's really important that we also bring to light the things that we feel ashamed of, because part of what makes shame so energetically insidious is that we as humans get all secretive about it. We shut down. We have these secrets that our shame is like, it's all kind of mixed together. The shame, the secrecy, and there's something about sharing these things which just takes a massive, massive weight off of us. In this episode, I am going to get all into how to overcome shame. But first, let's talk about why do people feel shame around their bodies and their sexuality? So, number one, they were told it was wrong or sinful. Many, many people grew up with religious conditioning, especially around our sexuality. It might have been that they were judged by their parents or by their friends or by their caregivers. People often carry shame when they've had some traumatic sexual experiences or they've experienced abuse. What is really common is that the shame that we feel has been passed down from our parents or our caregivers. So essentially, our parents or our caregivers felt shame around their own sexuality. This is like an intergenerational thing. And then that shame was passed down. So because the parent or the caregiver wasn't able to accept their own sexuality, they never had their own sexuality affirmed as healthy, beautiful, natural, normal part of being a human. When a parent experiences their child, showing any displays of sexuality in any way, whether it's just, innocently touching the genitals, self-pleasuring, which I'll share about later, but this is 100% normal. When the caregiver experiences this, because of their own shame, they actually project that shame onto the child. So they might reprimand the child, they might slap their hand away, they might shout at them, they might threaten them. If they ever do that again, I'll XYZ. This is a very common response. And they might even have been shamed in, a really more abusive way, which I've also, I know about. So essentially this creates a cycle of intergenerational shame that just continues. And, something about shame is that people who feel ashamed of themselves are great at shaming others. So try to remember that, the next time someone attempts to shame you for something, because I know you're not allowing yourself to be shamed. We don't allow other people to do that. But next time someone might try, just remember that likely they feel ashamed, maybe even about the thing they're shaming you for. people who feel solid in themselves, people who love themselves and have a healthy self-esteem, don't participate in shaming behaviors, because we know how toxic and detrimental it can be. So just remember, if you ever hear someone shaming someone or feel like, they're just bringing in this energy of shame, see if you can just connect with your heart and remember that that behavior is learned and they're probably dealing with shame themselves. So coming back to the sexual shame, usually when someone has sexual shame, it's because at some point someone had something negative to say. It's because there was an experience with another person who made us feel ashamed, whether it was intentional or whether it was unintentional. We can also misinterpret things that people say and do. Maybe you had a partner who kind of made a throwaway comment about your body or about your genitals or, some part of your sexuality, like a kink you have or something like that. They said something and you just felt yourself recoil, and it just really hurt. Like, sometimes people can say things that can feel kind of judgy or kind of, just not right, and we have a response to it. And that can happen throughout our whole lives and not just in childhood. So, when you're feeling into this thing around shame, it can be really beautiful to take out a journal and just reflect on the partners you've had, reflect on the sexual experiences you've had, and just feel into each of them. And are there any that stand out? Do you have any lingering imprints? Things that bother you, things that don't feel good for you about things that have happened in your past, in terms of your sexual encounters. These experiences are really powerful things to explore, either with yourself, in your journal, or maybe you want to just take your phone and leave yourself a voice note and just kind of let loose and let some of these things air out. And again, it might be confronting, but it will help you get a clearer idea of what shame you might be carrying around your sexuality due to the experiences that you've had. And this, of course, is a very beautiful thing to work through with a therapist. But I first wanted to give you these kind of these free options, these free places where you can start. Because maybe having a therapist is not right for you at this time, but that doesn't mean you have to stay stuck where you are if you want to heal. So coming back to this point, just about how healthy, normal, beautiful, and natural our sexuality is. We've actually learned through modern science, and this might be, this might surprise you. I hope it blows your mind. But we've actually learned through modern science that babies in the womb self-pleasure, and infants from as young as 3 to 4 months old can self-pleasure and reach orgasm. Pleasure, and especially giving ourselves pleasure, is a really powerful form of self-regulation, which basically means to calm ourselves down and to come back to a grounded, calm, coherent state. And that is such a gift, that is a really, really amazing thing. And we see children, like I said, from as young as a few months old doing that. There is also incredible anecdotal evidence, and I heard this story through a teacher of mine who is a very close friend with a death doula. And a death doula is someone who basically accompanies the dying process. And he shared with me that if someone's death happens in a conscious way, that the last 20 or so breaths are highly orgasmic, which is just, what an incredible way to die, right? To be deeply in pleasure and in love. I mean, it's certainly a way to go. So we are innately sexual beings. If our sexuality was solely for reproduction, then why do we still have desire and libido when we're after the age where we can still reproduce, right? It's like sexuality is a part of who we are from even before we're born. So from when we're in the womb till the day we die, unless we lose our capacity to feel our desire and our sexual energy, which of course is something different in itself. But we need to really acknowledge the importance of our sexuality and really give it a place. Something that I've also learned throughout my training in sexuality is that our sexual self-esteem and our general self-esteem go hand in hand. Meaning, if you're comfortable in your sexuality, likely you're comfortable within yourself. And if you hold shame around your sexuality, that shame is there at the core of your being, and it deeply impacts your self-esteem elsewhere in the world. It's also really important to note that sexual shame is a direct contributor to sexual dysfunction. So when I'm working with someone around, sexual dysfunction, maybe it's erectile dysfunction, maybe the woman has never experienced an orgasm, usually, not always, but usually shame plays a huge role in this and is a massive part of what's causing the problem. So much of sexuality is psychosomatic. Obviously not all of it. There are, real physiological things that can come up, of course, but a lot of it is psychological. So it's another thing to bear in mind when you hold shame around your sexuality or around your body. This can actually play a role in creating more problems, which is all the more reason to overcome it. Hey, my love, just popping in here quickly with a little ad break, except it's not really an ad because I'm not selling anything, but I do have a favor to ask. If you love this podcast, I would just be over the moon if you would give the podcast a rating wherever you choose to listen to your podcasts. I know it can be a little tricky to do this, so I've actually included a link in the show notes that makes it super easy for you. You just scroll down, click it, and then follow all the steps. When you rate and review, it helps other people to find the show. It basically just gives the show a little algorithm boost on these different platforms, and it really means the world to me, especially receiving your words. It makes me feel so happy. And if you do this and send me a screenshot, I will send you a little gift. So do that and send to me, DM it to me on Instagram at TAMAR__RAPHAEL for your free gift. Another thing that I just wanted to say, and I mean, I haven't grown up with really intense, like dogmatic religious conditioning. So I don't really feel qualified to speak at length around that particularly, although I can recommend other women doing that. There's a woman called Dr. Kimberly Rose Pendleton who I've never actually worked with her, but I follow her, and she has a whole business based on intimacy, and she grew up very religious, and so she has a lot of really amazing work about that. If that's something that calls to you, I recommend checking her out. But I just want to say, because I'm, obviously my work is about the meeting point between sexuality and spirituality, sexuality and the sacred. And so I just want to, ask this question. If God made us perfect, if God made us just the way that we're meant to be, how could there be anything wrong with our sexuality? We were given it. We were given it for a reason. And really navigating this in today's society, it's like how to have a sacred connection with our sexuality. This is such a huge question, especially when there are such extremes that we see, There is this puritanical culture, and then there is the extreme over-sexualization of women. There's I'm sure you've seen these reels on TikTok and Instagram of male chefs, and it's just it is so ridiculously sexual, and people do it on purpose because they know that it sells. They know it gets them more views. They know it keeps people engaged with their content because we all have our consciousness, we have, this part of us that's connected to our intelligence, to, higher principles. And then we have our animal nature. We're animals, We've got these bodies, and these bodies speak to us, especially when we're open to listening to them. I believe there is a path, where we can deeply, descend into our matter. We can bring our consciousness all the way down into our root. We can make peace with our messy, beautiful, imperfect bodies and bodily functions, and, our blood and our piss and our sweat and our cum and all of it. And learn how to love it, know how to love it and know how to enjoy these bodies that we were given and to enjoy our time on earth, right? Isn't that what it's all about? So I'm just going to come back to shame just a little bit more, and we're going to move on to how to overcome shame. But firstly, I just wanted to give a little bit of context around what does shame even mean? And the very, when we feel shame, there is an implication that something is wrong. And not just something. It's when we feel shame, we feel that who we are, is wrong. We feel like there is something wrong with me. And it's very important to understand that. It's the nature of shame points directly back at ourselves. And like I said, we can direct shame outwards, but it's always a reflection of what we feel within. healthy people don't shame other people because we know how hard it is to recover from that. So shame is something that pretty much everyone on the planet has felt at some point in our life. So those who aren't carrying shame are usually those who've had to really work to overcome it. So if shame means that we believe something is wrong about ourselves, if we feel shame, healing shame requires recognizing our inherent goodness and innocence. I'm going to just say that again. Healing shame requires that we recognize our inherent goodness and innocence. Take a moment to just be with that, to reflect, like, does that bring anything up for you? Can you recognize your inherent goodness and innocence? Like if I say to you, hey, like, I see you and your innate goodness, your innate innocence, like there's nothing that you can do or not do that would take that away. Like you were born good, you were born innocent. Like I see your heart, I know your heart, and you're a good egg. For so many of us, shame really originates from our childhood. And, you know, whether our caregivers meant to shame us or they didn't, and for whatever reason it was, you know, I'm sure that you are very connected to what it was that you're meant to feel shame about, you know. I just want you to take a moment and connect, like, with your inner child around this and around these places where there are shame. And I just want to say, like, what if it wasn't your fault? What if you didn't know better? What if you didn't even think there was something wrong? As children, we take things on and we make ourselves wrong. You know, as children, when we were children, we made ourselves wrong for a lot of things. And the reason that children do this is because they are completely dependent on their caregivers. So when something goes wrong in the home, when something goes wrong in the family, and, you know, maybe you can resonate with this, like maybe something was going on in your parents' marriage, maybe there was just something like really stressful happening in the family, and because you as a child were completely dependent on your caregivers, on your parents, to admit that your parents might have been in the wrong would be so deeply unsafe that your whole entire world would have collapsed. You know, it's like, can you appreciate that from a mental perspective? It's like a child is completely dependent. So that's why psychologically we make ourselves wrong as children. We take on emotional responsibility because it's actually an easier burden to carry. The shame is an easier burden to carry than the complete destabilization of our parents being wrong and our parents not being, you know, worthy providers or worthy protectors. We maintain this image of our parents and our caregivers as much as we possibly can. And of course, you know, this is not going to resonate for everyone. I just want to say, like, you might have had a very different experience, and I can't speak directly to everyone's experience of childhood, but I'm doing my best with this very complex subject. So essentially, we grow up with this understanding, and it's it's not a conscious understanding. This is obviously something that's happening in the deep subconscious of a child's being, of a child's soul. But because it's psychologically safer to make ourselves wrong, this leaves many of us with a tendency to see ourselves as defective. And this can go so deep for some people. Unaddressed shame can sabotage opportunities, relationships, careers, literally anything that we care about and put our energy towards. So now let's talk about how can we overcome sexual shame. Something that Mantak Chia talks about in the beginning of his book, The Multi-Orgasmic Woman, as a foundational principle is no more negative self-talk, especially about your body. We as women especially are so sensitive about our beauty and about how we feel, and really speaking badly about our bodies to ourselves is so detrimental to our sense of self. We all have insecurities and we all have things that we wish were a little bit tighter or perkier or more smooth or bigger or smaller. But we really need to do the work of not just loving ourselves, but committing to no more negative self-talk. I really recommend you limit your exposure to Instagram models and unrealistic beauty standards that make you feel crap about yourself. I didn't used to follow any of these Instagram model types, but since coming back to London and just being more focused on social media and my own social media presence, I've really noticed how easy it is to get kind of, almost sucked into this wormhole of looking at really beautiful women. And I don't really feel sexually attracted to women. I just see a beautiful woman and I'm like, oh my God, she's so stunning. And then before I know it, my For You page is just all these models, and it's not really an accurate representation of womanhood as a whole. We're really looking at the top 1% of women on the planet, and women who've had lots of plastic surgery, they might have had lots of work done, and obviously so many women are just naturally stunning, but many, many, many people are using all kinds of filters. They've got professional makeup, they've had work done that they may or may not be talking about, and it's whether we know that about them or not, it still creates this standard that we measure ourselves against. Something that I actually was experiencing at the beginning of my sacred sexual awakening. My sexual awakening happened at the same time as my spiritual awakening, so that's what I call it. I really started to understand how much shame I felt around my body, and even though I did feel beautiful most of the time, which is amazing, I also really didn't like certain parts of my body, and I would not want to be on top of a man when we would make love because I would feel so afraid and ashamed of how I must look from his angle, how I must look to him. It just the thought of it filled me with so much dread and so much anxiety. I just completely avoided that. And that's been huge for me to really unravel and to realize what I'm kind of, how I'm holding myself back, how I'm limiting the way that I am when I'm with a man, and how like deeply embarrassed I was around my body, which is just a natural, beautiful woman's body. So maybe it's time for you to look at what you're surrounding yourself with, and yeah, just especially these social media influences, and take note of how these things make you feel. So no more negative self-talk. Number 2 on the list of how we can overcome our sexual shame is through working with modalities like tapping and mirror work. You may or may not be familiar with these modalities, but when we feel shame around our body and our sexuality, it's really important that we actually do the work to kind of like normalize this topic for us, to get used to feeling it and speaking about it and contemplating it. And at first it will be super uncomfortable, but it's gonna be so worth it. Once we know what we're dealing with, like once we know what we feel shame about, where we feel shame, like who it's connected to, what experience it's connected to, like when we've done our personal inventory of like our own shame, we can use these beautiful modalities to work with them. I specifically mention the modalities EFT tapping and mirror work because these are the ones that I feel are personally really, really powerful for overcoming shame. EFT tapping, if you don't already know, it is such an incredible and powerful modality where you basically tap using your fingers or your hands on different points, like on the face and on your body, whilst speaking out different affirmations, and you can get different scripts for that. You can work with someone on it. You can find loads of great YouTube videos. My friend Jen is amazing, so I'll include a link to her YouTube down below. Or you can just actually like make up your own words, say what you want to say. Just watch a few videos and you'll get the hang of it pretty fast. But it is so powerful in helping us rewire our subconscious beliefs and just really working with mindset. I've absolutely loved going deeper with EFT tapping this year, and some of my upcoming group programs are definitely going to feature EFT because it's so, so powerful. And mirror work, it's essentially working with a mirror, as the name suggests, and really learning to love what we see when we look in the mirror. And this obviously is such deep and important work. And if you're listening to this and you're cringing and just thinking, oh my God, Tamar, like this sounds like hell, like don't make me sit in front of a mirror. I just can't imagine finding anything about myself that I would love. I just want you to know that whatever you look like, if you have a mindset that is judgmental, critical, always looking towards what you can improve, focusing on what's not good enough, that's an attitude and a mindset we're always going to have, no matter how fit we get, how thin we get, how big our boobs are, how small our boobs are, how smooth our skin is, how flawless our hair is, how perfectly straight our teeth are. We're always going to be looking for the next thing. So really addressing how we feel about ourselves from the inside out, how we feel in our bodies, how we feel about how they look, how we feel about our genitals and how our genitals look. This is so, so important to confront. Do not be fooled into thinking that how you feel is a reflection of how you look on the outside. This is an inside job, and I promise once you start noticing your own beauty, you're just going to see more and more of it all the time. The third thing that is so important for you when you're on this journey of letting go of shame is being really honest with your intimate partner around your experience of feeling shame. So this is actually something I was recently in a retreat setting with one of my mentors, and a woman in the group had such a beautiful process around this, and he was asking her, like, do you talk about this with your intimate partner? And she was saying no, she never speaks about it. But the thing is that when we come to be intimate with another person, we are sharing our energy with them. It's an energetic exchange. I'm sure you've kind of heard of this concept before, especially because you're here listening to this podcast. So whether we name something or not, energetically, we're exchanging information and things are felt on a subtle level. This is something so mysterious and so beautiful about life here on Earth that we don't always need to name things, they're felt. And someone doesn't need to consciously understand why they're getting a certain vibe from you. They don't need to be super empathic or spiritual or aware. They don't even need to know anything about this subject, but it will have an impact on them, their perception of you, and their experience of you and your connection when you're together. And this isn't something we really have that much control over, other than actually being really vulnerable and honest and disclosing information like this. Bringing it to the surface, making the unconscious conscious, and choosing to share it with your partner. Now, if this is something, as I'm sharing, like, again, it creates this sort of like squirm feeling in your body, the idea of sharing this. This is a sign. I mean, firstly, like, sharing vulnerably always kind of, has some kind of like a visceral body response. If it didn't, it wouldn't be vulnerable, right? It's like that's what makes sharing something vulnerable is feeling, it's like feeling the intensity of that reveal in our body that makes it so powerful to lean into. This is why it's so important to choose our intimate partners wisely. If you're going to share your body with someone, I highly recommend choosing someone who you feel 110% comfortable revealing your emotions and your inner world and your intimate experience to. I really don't recommend withholding such information, especially as it relates to the space you're sharing with them, because this actually drastically reduces the intimacy between the two of you. And if you share this with someone and they don't respond lovingly, I would take that as a red flag, honestly. Like, I would just receive that information and reflect on whether they are actually the right person to have access to my temple space. Number 4 of ways to overcome sexual shame is to expose yourself to high consciousness and sex positive spaces and people. So firstly, congratulations. If you're listening to this, then you're already in the right place. So spaces like this podcast where we openly talk about sexuality can create real safety and relief in our system as you slowly begin to understand that it's okay to talk about things, and it's not just okay, it's really important. There are so many wonderful events, spaces, places online where people are exploring their relationships, their sexuality in a really conscious way. I just want to be really clear when I share about this, because I am not necessarily talking here about sexual gratification. Like, this isn't necessarily about finding spaces where we can get our needs met, although it might be. These are spaces, for example, like they don't need to be temple nights or tantra retreats. They could be things like naked yoga, or even going to a nude spa where there's actually no focus at all on our sexuality or interacting with others in a sexual way, but you're exposed to all kinds of different bodies, people of all kinds of colors, shapes and sizes, and these spaces are just amazing for helping us realize that we really do come all shapes and sizes, and it's all beautiful. It's like our body is not something that we ever need to hide or apologize for, but that we're actually part of one big, beautiful human family who have bodies. There's nothing that we need to be ashamed of. I am, of course, a huge advocate of tantra retreats and any spaces that explore conscious intimacy and sexuality, but my feeling really is that they're not necessarily for people who are new to personal development. I really feel these spaces are quite advanced, and for the people who really have a solid sense of self, they've done some inner work, they've done some shadow work, they preferably have a foundation in meditation, preferably they've done some embodiment work, some somatic work, and that's why when I teach sacred sexuality, I teach it in conjunction with meditative practices, communication techniques, embodiment practice, because I really feel like these steps are too important to skip over, and they're steps, they're things and skills that I had developed a little bit before I got into these spaces, and they massively helped me deal with the intensity of those spaces and like find my center of gravity. But I also learned a lot of things after I was in these spaces as a result of feeling them missing. And I really noticed how having these things really just enriched my experience of relationship and deepened my experience of these spaces. So I highly recommend seeking out these kind of spaces, following people online, watching videos about this subject, and just immersing yourself in spaces where people feel free to have these conversations. Invest your time and energy into this part of your life to create new positive associations with sexuality, with your body. So many of the desires and kinks and fantasies that we have, for example, are things that we feel ashamed of and we think are super weird. But I guarantee you, if you take a few steps into some of these communities, I'm sure that you will feel like the things you've been holding inside of you are actually very normal, very acceptable, and things that many other people also experience. And I just know what a relief that can be, and how quickly that can just diffuse any sense of there being something wrong with us when we see that many other people experience what we do too. So finally, I just want to also really recommend, if you're a woman doing this kind of work with other women, there's definitely something to be said for doing this kind of work in mixed groups. But I personally, it's also, I say the same about having like tantric body work, doing one-on-one work with women rather than men at first. Doing these things in a mixed group is definitely just more confronting. Like, it can just bring a lot more up for you to have to like deal with. Things like interpersonal dynamics, relationships, things like that. And it can be really, really distracting. I also just believe so deeply that as women, it's so important that we do this work with other women, because usually we as women have a very different rhythm. We have a very different pace. We really need things to be in a different way. And I've found that holding these spaces for women and also participating in female-only spaces have been so deeply nourishing for me on my journey of really leaning back and loving my sensual feminine eroticism. There's something just so validating about being around other women and doing this work. I know it was so supportive for the ladies who were in my last container doing feminine embodiment practice. It was just so luscious and so beautiful, and I am really, really excited to start offering these again in the new year. I'm going to be sharing about a few really, really exciting group programs for women where we can work together on these exact things. So, my loves, that's it for today. This has been a really, really packed episode. I hope that it could serve and support you in some way. Reach out to me on Instagram, send me a DM. My name is at TAMAR__RAPHAEL. You can find me on Facebook. I'm also on YouTube, which is really, really fun. I've been really loving that lately. And yeah, let me know, how did you find this episode? I love connecting with you all, as always, and I'm just wrapping you up and sending you the biggest, most loving squeeze during this festive season. Mwah. You're listening to the Embodied Mystic Podcast. Thank you for being here and for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and that it could serve you in some way. I'd love to hear from you. My inbox is always open. Let me know what spoke to you in this episode, and if there was a moment that lit you up or brought you into deeper self-reflection. If you loved this episode, I'd be super grateful if you took a moment to leave a review or share with a friend. You can do this easily by visiting the link in the show notes. It's been a real pleasure connecting with you today, and I'll see you soon.